So good morning, everybody, and a huge welcome to the RCN Wales Journal Club Present. And this time it's a really exciting event for us. It's in conjunction with World Book Night, and we have best-selling author Amanda Prowse and her son Josh Hartley here to talk about their non-fiction work, The Boy Between. So just to let you all know, this is a conversation that's going to include discussion around depression and suicide. The event's also going to be recorded. So without further ado, I'm now going to hand over to Helen Wiley, the Director for the Royal College of Nursing in Wales, to introduce our authors for today. Thanks, Helen.
Thank you, Vicky. Bore da. Good morning, everybody. Croeso, welcome to the RCN Wales Journal Club. It's my absolute pleasure to be asked to introduce Mandy and Josh today, and a real privilege for us that they're coming along to talk about the book. Mandy is a prolific and best-selling author. She's published in dozens of languages and sold millions of copies worldwide. She co-authored The Boy Between with her son Josh. And in the book, each of them tell the story of Josh's battle with depression from the age of 18 to the present day from their own point of view. One chapter is Mandy's perspective and the next is Josh's, and so on. The Boy Between tells the lived experience of how depression took hold of a university student to such an extent that he planned to take his own life, and the impact of his illness on the rest of his family. And whilst this is a first-hand account of Josh and his mum, it highlights the challenges many people face with mental health and the alarming rates of depression and suicide amongst younger men in particular. It's a harrowing but ultimately hopeful account of Josh and Mandy's journey that will resonate with many readers across the world. We have some copies of the book available at RCN Wales Library, so if you want one after this session, please make contact with the library staff. And so it's my absolute delight now to hand over to Mandy and Josh and to let them walk us through the journey they've been on, which is set out in this book, The Boy Between. Thank you, Mandy, and thank you, Josh. Diolch yn fawr iawn.
Thank you for that lovely introduction, and thank you so much for inviting Josh and I to speak today. Not only are we really honoured, but I think it's an example of just how far the conversation and awareness around depression and suicide has come, even in the last few years. And whilst I wish I wasn't an expert on it, I'm also very thankful that that is the case, that we are able to discuss it more. Yeah, as you said, Helen, The Boy Between, here's one I prepared earlier, is the book that Joshie and I wrote together. I am most well known, I think, for writing fiction, which I love. I've written 30 novels, and the best thing about it is I get to craft the most pleasing ending. I can do whatever I like. It's not quite the case in real life, and I suppose that was something that was partly what shocked me so much about my son's diagnosis. I was a single mum for Josh for many years until I got married, and Josh was kind of quite a solitary child, actually. Super smart, didn't really like school, and I used to say to him, do you know what, you're brilliant, and when you get to university, your life is going to begin. It's going to be wonderful for you. Everything will fall into place. It's going to be the time of your life. Because I'd seen a film and I knew what it was like. You got a degree and then you finished at the end, you threw your hat in the air, you had great parties, and life was wonderful. And that was kind of what I planned for Josh. Had you met me prior to 2016, I think I was one of those mums, you bump into them in the supermarket. Let's call them smug mum. That was definitely me. I'd have told you quite confidently that I knew everything about my kids, my two boys. I knew their friends, I knew their habits, their likes, their dislikes. I ate dinner with them. They would always text me when they arrived. They wore warm clothing when it was cold. Job done. And I would have said, as I say, quite confidently that I knew what was going on with them. Turns out that wasn't quite the case. Josh, just before his A-levels, started to, I use this word quite a lot, he started to sort of unravel. And I had this huge dilemma. Is it just teenage angst? Is it just hormones? Is it just anxiety and stress over exams? What's going on with him? He was quite reluctant to talk about how he was feeling. typical teenage boy, really. You know, is everything all right? Yeah. Didn't want to discuss it with his mum, of all people. Just before his A-levels, Josh lost interest in a lot of things, in school, in social life, in personal hygiene, all the things that are obviously, I now know, indicators of what was really happening with Josh. I found it hard to have a baby. I miscarried a lot, and it was a real hard journey. And I remember sitting and holding that baby in my arms and thinking, he's going to be the best doctor, lawyer, cowboy, sculptor, artist the world has ever seen. And that's what I wanted for his future. I had these amazing plans and ideas for what I wanted him to be. Never once did I think that the thing I would hope most for Josh was that he would want to stay on the planet. That was about as far from anything I could imagine. I'd never really understood depression. I think it's fair to say I didn't know if it was true. I have always been, despite knockbacks in life, despite, you know, cancer, skin, addiction, all the things that come into all our lives. I remember thinking I've never had a day where I felt depressed. Lucky me. So when someone mentions the word depression, it was really hard for me to understand what they meant. If you've never seen a banana, tasted a banana, smelt a banana, you're thinking, well, do they mean an apple? No, they don't. Depression is a very different thing and something that I've had to learn to understand. Josh went off and did his A-levels, and he did great. He got B's and C's, which, you know, I'd have been over the moon with. But of course, Josh had set himself a very high standard, and it wasn't quite what he had hoped for. We'd been putting quite a bit of pressure on Josh, saying, we call him Dr. Josh, Professor Josh, you know, all these amazing things he was going to do with his future. And I think it made it harder for him to actually be able to say, I'm struggling. I don't even know whether I want to take my exams or whether I want to go to university. Because again, we were just sort of blinkered and just kept saying, it's going to be great. When you get there, your life will begin. He seemed to plateau. He went off to Southampton University in the first instance. And we were absolutely over the moon that he was managing to live this life. He had a lovely little studio flat. We were incredibly proud, and I think it's fair to say we took our foot off the gas. I was working on I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here in Australia in 2016. My friend was on it, and I was doing the after show and all those sort of bits on ITV2. And we were driving back to the hotel, which was our morning, but your nighttime. And I got a phone call from Simeon, and he just said, Simeon's my husband. I've brought Josh home. And I said, oh, well, that's nice. He phoned me to tell me that in Australia. He said, yeah, I've brought him home. He's okay. And I thought, well, again, this is, you know, odd. But what he was actually trying to tell me was that Josh had tried to take his life. And it doesn't matter how many years have passed since that year, since that day, still feels very unreal for me to even say that. You know, Josh he's my heart, he's everything, he's wonderful, both our boys are. And to try and get my head around the fact that he would rather not be here is something that I still find impossible to contemplate and certainly to understand. Simeon met me from the airport and we drove back to our house in the West Country. And I remember saying, do you know what? This is a good thing. This is actually great because you have to reach rock bottom before you can start to come up. And so this is rock bottom. This is a good thing. I was still trying to find the positive with my annoying glass half full attitude, which apparently is most annoying at 6 in the morning. But that's kind of what I thought, that it was all going to get a lot better from here on in. Little did I know, and actually I'm thankful I didn't know, that that was really just the beginning for us. Josh started to lead a horizontal life. He went to bed, he drew the curtains, he didn't want to shower, he didn't want to eat, he didn't want to be with us, talk to us, communicate. He didn't want to be alive. And I honestly didn't know what to do. I went from being smug mum to absolutely petrified mum. I now hover somewhere between the two. But it was really, really hard time because I didn't know what the answer was. I thought, well, okay, Josh isn't well. What's the drug that can fix him? Where's the retreat that will make him better? You know, what's the magic formula, the potion, the place, the doctor, the specialist? I didn't know at that point. There isn't one. There are a combination of things that mean that Josh lives now a great life, but I didn't know that at the time, and it was the most scary thing for all of us. Because as Josh says in the book, depression doesn't come and live in one room. It doesn't live in a drawer or behind a curtain. It lives in every corner of your house. under every cushion and in every mirror while you're cleaning your teeth, and at the sink while you're washing up, and on your pillow when you're waiting to go to sleep. It's everywhere, and it invades a house, and it sort of throws a cloak over your home, and sometimes to get outside and breathe is the only time you can feel free of it. And if that's how we were feeling, we can only imagine what that must have been like for Josh, who was really sick. There were two turning points for us as a family, and for Josh and I as a mother and son. I went into his room one day and I said, you know, Josh, I said, we're really struggling to know how to help you best. What can we do? We don't know what to do. We were really helpless, and I felt so alone. I thought, surely no parents have ever been through this, because it's really bloody awful. This must be, you know, why are we suffering like this? What have we done wrong, and how do we make it better? And I went into his room and I said, Josh, you've got to help us, because we don't know what to do next. He refused to talk to anyone. He refused to visit a doctor even. And he said, when I'm having a bad day, come into my room, open the window, give me a cup of tea, and maybe sit with me for a little while, but you don't have to say anything. And I said, oh, what? Like you're ill? He said, I am ill, Mum. I am ill. And that was the first time I think that I understood that what was going on with Josh wasn't hormones or attention or stress, or my son had an illness. He had a mental illness. And so I had to treat it like an illness. I had to do what I did, you know, when I got sick, when I got very sick, and people would bring me casseroles and throw their arms around me and write me nice letters and tell me I was supported and loved. But with mental illness, it seemed to be the opposite. People feared the contagion of it, and they didn't understand it. And rather than be supportive and throw their arms around, most people said, oh, what's he got to be depressed about? You know, he's not in a war-torn country. He's not in a famine, you know, area. And I thought, yeah, you're right. But when I got cancer, no one said, oh, there's loads of people without it. What's wrong with you? Of course, it was so different that, you know, that the difference between how we treat mental and physical illness, seeing it firsthand, was really quite shocking, and just made me feel desperate for Josh, because he was the one suffering, and it can only have made it that much worse. I think it made him feel very isolated. I know it did. I think understanding that he was sick was a great step, but still, what did I do with that information? The truth is, I didn't want a child like that. I wanted the doctor, lawyer, cowboy, sculptor, artist that I'd banked on when he was a baby. What do I do with a child who has severe mental illness and won't get out of bed? That's not what I planned. I wanted him to go to university and lead a great life. And the second turning point came for me when someone said to me, you know, this has nothing to do with you, don't you? And I said, oh, well, that's very kind. I know it's nothing I've done. And he said, no, it is nothing to do with you. You happen to be a member of Josh's family, but Josh is sick, and it's Josh's journey. And I don't like the word journey because I think it's used a lot, but Josh is in the middle of a maze, and he needs to find the way out, and he needs to leave markers so that if he goes back into that maze, he knows how to get out of it again and again and again. And all those little coping strategies will help him lead a really good life. And I thought, God, does this mean this is as good as it gets? Is this it? Turns out it is. Turns out it is as good as it gets. And that was a desperate realization. I'd never heard people say, oh, I had a bit of depression, I'm fine now. Or, oh, my sister had depression for a couple of days, but she's over it and she's good. People talked about battling depression, about struggling with depression, about living with depression. And I realized that Josh had an illness that probably wasn't anytime soon going to just disappear. There wasn't going to be that moment where we popped a champagne cork and sailed off into the sunset, all laughing and having a lovely time. It wasn't going to be like that. And that was really hard. Not for us necessarily, but really hard to look at my beautiful son and understand that that might be the rest of his life. Josh and I started to write to each other. I know it sounds bizarre, but I sent him an email one day and I said, how are you feeling today? I was so scared of talking about the words depression, mentioning the word suicide, because I thought that if I said it, I might make it happen. I know that's not possible. And as Josh said, by the time I'd had those thoughts, he'd been having them for a very long time. But I thought if I said the word depression, it might give him the idea. If I said the word suicide, it might make him jump. And I was absolutely petrified. And I kind of lived on a tightrope, just wondering when I was going to fall, because that's what it felt like. It felt like we were hanging on. And then Josh said to me, I feel, Mum, like I might need some outside help. And it was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. It was a huge breakthrough. Josh then saw a GP, which led to a number of sort of areas that we tried drugs, we tried therapy, we tried absolutely everything, to be honest. And slowly, Josh began to come back. And actually, I realised that Josh leads a very good life with depression. So while we were writing to each other, we realised that what we had with all this information we were exchanging was a really informative book, because I didn't know what to reach for information when I was struggling. I didn't know where to go for the answers. Often there aren't any. But even just support to know that I wasn't alone was really, really important. Before we knew it, we had 20,000 words, and one of my editors was over here talking about something different, and I showed her. And she said, I think this is a book, Mandy. And I said, oh gosh, I would never publish it. No way. I don't want Josh to be that person. I don't want Josh to be that boy. And Josh said, I am that boy. This is me. I do have this illness. And he said, if I can help one person not to feel as alone and desperate as I did, then I think it will be a worthwhile thing to publish it. Ironically, the person the book has helped most is Josh. I think having a sort of reflective window, an opportunity to go back and look at those events and experiences that led up to the time when Josh tried to take his life for the first time, it gave us both a healthy perspective. It was also, we agreed that if we were going to write it, we had to do it in a very unsanitized way. There was no point in writing a book that made everything cozy and sweet and, you know, sugar-coated. It had to be raw and honest and open. And it is, but it's not depressing, ironically. The book is actually quite uplifting, with moments of joy and moments of humour, because actually sometimes at our lowest moments, the humorous side was all we had. One example is, and this makes me sound like, you know, I might need to talk to someone, was when I decided that I had a poinsettia. Is that how you say it? A Christmas plant, a poinsettia. And one day I went into the TV room and the poinsettia was on the windowsill, and Josh had got out of bed and he was sitting in the TV room, and it was the first time he'd been upright and not horizontal for the longest time. And it was like, oh, Josh is up, you know, fanfare throughout the house. And he said, oh, that plant looks lovely. I said, oh, it is lovely. Let's water it. Let's talk about the plant. Anything to sort of stimulate a conversation, engage him. And then I had this thought that if the plant died, Josh would die. I know how that sounds. You're thinking E.T., aren't you, in the wardrobe with the dying plant? It's exactly like that. And so I loved and tended this plant. I called him Peter, obviously. And I went away to work in London for a couple of days. And when I came back, the plant was less than healthy looking. And I absolutely broke down. It was just, I can't describe it. It was like, you haven't watered Peter. Of course, I wasn't crying because no one had watered Peter. I didn't really care. I was crying because I didn't know how to fix my child. I didn't know how to fix him, but I could keep this plant alive. And it felt like a kind of adequate substitution for some of the time. So the book's full of things like that, anecdotes of how we did get through. And we did. And we're still here. And Josh is still here. And for me, the biggest success Josh will ever have is every day he stays on the planet when he doesn't want to. That really takes something that I will never understand, how deep you have to reach and how hard you have to fight. But when you don't want to lift your head off the pillow and you manage to engage in a conversation or take a journey or eat a meal with people or anything, it takes superhuman strength I will never possess. Josh is our hero. He's wonderful. He might not make it to be a doctor. That's okay. But we will fight with every breath we have to keep Josh here and to give him the very best life. And again, I stress, he leads a great life. He might have depression, just like I had cancer. It doesn't define him, just like it doesn't define me. He leads a great life, and I think that's a really important message that I want to get across. I think it might be a good idea to bring Josh on, if that's okay, and ask him to read the prologue of the book, a small chapter. So when you're ready, Josh, nice and slow, over to you.
The decision to end my life was one that came easily. There was not, as you might imagine, some great wrangling with the consequences of something so final. None at all. By the time I came to the conclusion that to slip away from this existence was probably the best thing for me, I had lost the ability to think deeply about anything or anyone. I was beyond reason, with my reality skewed. I wasn't sad, I was numb. This state felt interminable. I was exhausted, and the thought of having to spend the rest of my days in this endless, blank circle of desperation was one I was not prepared to contemplate. What was the point? I woke that day in the mental fog I had grown accustomed to. All thoughts were slow and slurred, making rational thinking improbable. It must have been daytime, as the sun rather unsuccessfully shone through my perpetually drawn blinds. A few weeks prior, looking out at the blue sky was almost a treat, something to break up the monotony of the day. But I was past that now. Time had lost all meaning. I could have been in that room anywhere between 5 days to 3 weeks, sleeping up to 18 hours a day, and spending the other 6 in a trance-like haze, staring up at the ceiling. My bed was an island. It happened to be in a medium-sized UK city, but in terms of loneliness and isolation, it might as well have been the South Pacific. I occasionally left my island to get water, food, or use the loo, but recently, even thirst had failed me. The pull of that bed was like trying to escape a black hole. I felt beyond the event horizon, and even the greatest invitation of all time would not have tempted me away from that 6-foot by 4-foot space that was my world. I was unaware of my surroundings, but looking back they were fairly putrid. The studio flat in which my illness had fully taken grip could have been the student dream. A large space for one person, with brand new appliances and all the creature comforts laying the foundation for an excellent year. The dirty clothes and old takeaway containers were stuck to the wooden floor. My sheets hadn't been washed for months, and I had no timescale to work with when I'd last showered. It didn't matter though. Nothing did. The very colour of the world had turned down until only grayscale remained. Day by day, over an unknown period of time, my emotions were chipped away, piece by piece, subtly enough for me not to notice. I was an empty husk, devoid of emotion. I wasn't sad anymore. I felt nothing. Being sad would have been an improvement. The ability to feel anything had been gone for quite some time. I opened the package containing the tablets. The smell of sulphur hit me. They were a solution, and therefore something definitive, a marker in a life that had become rootless. I often think about that boy sitting on the end of the bed, with the tablets in his palm. A boy living in the space between darkness and light. I think of how his story nearly ended on that day. I think about his family telling tales of a life that had become overwhelming, and was now no more than a footnote in their history. I was that boy, and it was not my last day, but I came close.
Thank you, Josh. Thank you, Josh.
No, should we answer some any questions?
It doesn't get any easier to hear Josh say that, even though obviously I'm very familiar with that passage. And I think it's still incredibly brave of him to open up in this way. But part of our mission to get people talking about depression and suicide, particularly in young men, is to have these exact conversations, no matter how hard. So I think what we'd like to do, if possible, is hand over to Vicky, and I think she's going to facilitate some Q&As, which we're both very happy to answer. Thanks, Vicky.
Thank you so much, both of you, Mandy and Josh. And I was promising myself I wasn't going to cry, but I failed. So that was incredible. Thank you. Right, let's get into the Q&A then. And we've started off with one for you, Mandy, asking, and I can totally identify with this. I have a son who I'm guessing is around your age, Josh. How hard was it for you to read Josh's chapters of the book?
It was, thank you for that question. It was incredibly hard to read those chapters. I think it was the first time I understood exactly how low Josh was feeling, which, you know, when you're talking about your own child, was horrific. But also Josh didn't hold back on telling me the things that I'd done to actually sometimes make the situation worse. But of course it was necessary for me to not carry on with that behaviour. But he explained to me that when I would come into his room and say, how about a little holiday? Why don't you go for a nice walk? He said, the fact that you didn't even understand what I was going through, and I'm the person who's supposed to, you know, be the one who makes everything okay, I always had for all his life. He said that was really, really hard because it just made him feel even more isolated, understandably. So I found that desperate. I also, and I'm speaking very candidly, I kind of, in a very narcissistic way, I needed to know that when it came to that day that could have been Josh's last, and there were a couple of those days, did he think about me? Did he not think of what it might be like for me and everybody who loves him, his whole family, his friends, his nan and granddad? There's lots of us. And I kind of took comfort from the fact, in a strange way, that he said I wasn't thinking about anyone. I wasn't thinking about anything. I wasn't me. You know, the phrase losing your mind or out of your mind, I thought about that a lot. It's a phrase that you use quite comfortably, but actually it's really true. He wasn't in his mind. And that was the best way for me to understand it. But I think I kind of had an emotional response and thought he must have been sitting there thinking, I need my mum, I want my mum. And that feeling of not being there for him, I know would have, and would of course haunt me forever. So in a strange way, as hard as it was to read his honesty, I kind of took a little bit of comfort from the fact that that wasn't the case. He actually felt like, in a bizarre way, peace, I suppose. And I know it sounds bizarre, but I took a bit of comfort from that. I really did. But it was very hard, and it always makes me laugh because Josh and I have done a lot of interviews and they always say, what was the hardest thing about writing the book? And he says, spending 8 hours a day with my mother. So yeah, charming. But it has changed the way that we communicate. We communicate much more openly about things that are hard. Still not easy, you know, we're still not perfect. It's still a learning curve and always will be, I suspect. But I am much better about saying, do you feel like you might take your life today, Josh? Are you feeling desperate today? You know, do you need space? What do you need today to make today okay? So the fact that even it's enabled us to get to that point is a really positive thing. Thank you for that question. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mandy. And yes, again, I can identify with my son, who I believe struggles to spend often even about 10 minutes with me. Sometimes the feeling's mutual, but there we go. So Josh, it's also from Nicola. Nicola is obviously our question asker of the session, and she's asking, how do you feel reading, I think she means now in the present, what it was like when you were at your lowest point? You know, when you read that now, are you feeling distanced from it, or are you straight back in that moment? I understand if that's a rather difficult question to answer and you'd rather not. So I'm going to follow your lead here, Josh. Thank you.
Well, I think the whole process of writing the book was extremely cathartic, and I don't really believe that time is the great healer. But looking back on things that have happened, you know, up to 7-8 years ago, even from my childhood, looking back on that with a new sense of perspective and from a much healthier mind, it is therapeutic in a lot of ways, and it brings back how tough the journey's been, perhaps, but there's no, you know, certainly doesn't bring any critical issues or anything like that back, but it just feels incredibly grateful to not be currently feeling that way. So I only look back on it with, it's almost in some ways looking at it like it was happening to someone else. I was almost just say, like, right now I live right behind my eyes. But back then I was living almost in the back of my skull. I was so distanced from reality. Everything felt, I was just so numb to absolutely everything. So it's almost, reading it feels like it was, I remember it obviously, but it's I do feel quite distant from it.
Thank you. Now, I'm going to make things really awkward for both of you and for our AV support, because I've got a question for both of you. And this is, could you say a little bit, I know you've touched on it already, but the actual process of writing the book. So it's, you know, those of us who have read it know, and you've both mentioned that it's set up as alternating chapters from each of you. So did you look at one another's drafts? Did you sit down together and have conversations about, right, and now I'm going to write this bit, Mum, so maybe you want to look at that? Yeah, I don't know which of you would like to jump in first.
Shall I go first then, Josh? I'll go first then. So Josh is severely dyslexic. He often has trouble spelling his own surname. We thought about changing it to what he spells it as, but then we thought, no, he won't be able to spell that either. Josh has always been very, very dyslexic, and so obviously that came with its own set of challenges before you even got to the subject matter. What would happen is Josh would often narrate or speak his verses, that's his poetry book, into the chapters, and then I would type them up for him. And we almost did it as like a back and forth response piece. So I would give a response to that chapter and send it to Josh, and he would read it and then give his response. Exactly as you know, if you've read the book, it's very much like a conversation, even though it's storytelling. It's very linear, and it's like very much like a conversation. So that's how we did it. And then the editing process, that goes off to people in America and London, and they do their magic. But everyone was really, really determined that it remained as authentic to the original script. So, you know, Josh's language can be a bit savoury sometimes, and I said, no, we've got to leave that in because that's how Josh talks. You know, and that was really important, because I thought if you changed any of that, it's not his authentic voice, and that was absolutely vital. And I think that's come across in the book. I hope it has.
I also think it was important to sort of not cover the same ground and sort of move the narrative forward. So even that could have been as detailed as I'll write up till this month and then you write the month after, in terms of, you know, real time. Yeah, it was just important we didn't tread the same ground. We moved the story forward with each chapter, and just how we were both feeling at that time about certain key events, I think was the main goal of each, you know, progression.
I think I would also just like to say that I probably cried more than I ever have writing any book ever. I just sobbed every day, all day. I found it, you know, Josh, I could tell, was finding it cathartic and also engaging, and it was in a way helping him, I think, not putting words in Josh's mouth, but I think it helped him understand a lot of how far he'd come, whereas I just found it the most desperate, draining, mournful experience of my life. I found it harrowing, and there were lots of things that I won't say I'd forgotten, but I'd purposely shut away in a drawer. And because then, of course, I wasn't only remembering it, but I knew what was behind it. So there was one incident, without, you know, spoiling the book, where Josh put his hand through a plate glass safety window, dragged it down and cut his wrist very badly. I always thought that was a drunken accident, you know, what an idiot. Turns out there was a lot more behind that than I'd understood. So in a way, I had to relive that with that information, which that made it harder than if I didn't know that. But of course, I'm glad I do know. It's all about this openness. But yeah, it was certainly far from easy, as you can tell by my voice. Sorry.
No, and please, you know, don't apologise. I, you know, wasn't the person experiencing these, but I also found it a very harrowing read, and was trying to read it on a train journey to London, and for exactly those reasons I realised I was going to be a sobbing mess if I carried on. I'm not wearing mascara today for that reason, you know, vanity or mascara and tears, which one was going to win out? Yeah, and you know that I wasn't the person living through it, so I can't imagine what it was like for both of you to have shared these things. Obviously we're very grateful because now we've got this amazing book to read and hopefully some learning from it. So bearing that in mind, Josh, if I could now ask you, putting you on the spot again, you know, I think again, parents so often feel like we're trying to do our best, but clearly, and I hear this constantly from my own son, I get it totally wrong. So from your lived experience, what advice would you give to a parent or other family member or friend trying to support somebody with depression? I understand it's you know, not everyone's experience is the same, but we'd be very grateful for your input. Thanks, Josh.
I think ultimately you have to trust your instincts on this. We've been asked before, how can you tell the difference between teenage angst, you know, hormones, and full-blown depression? And I think ultimately you just have to trust your instincts, what's normal, any changes, sudden changes for them. But the biggest turning point for me in my recovery was when I realised I was ill. Due to my own ignorance, was like, what's happening to me? I don't fully understand what's going on. I almost thought I did something so big and so bad that I couldn't see what I'd done, and I deserved to be feeling this way. So when a psychiatrist said to me that I was ill and I need to stop sort of blaming myself for being ill, that helped me take away some of the guilt I was feeling, helped me understand it. And I think caring for someone with depression, they have to be fully aware that it's an illness, and it's tough because ultimately you have to want to get better for yourself, but just be there to support them. You don't even have to talk with them. It could be something as simple as sitting at the end of their bed for 20 minutes, even in silence, opening a window, getting them a cup of tea, turning their pillow over. Even it can be the tiniest of gesture, but they add up and they do make a difference. So I think sort of hang on there. It can be a long and, you know, thankless journey, but you've just got to hold on in there and just know that they are supported, even though they probably won't feel that way. But it just takes time. So just knowing and stop. It's very easy to stop calling. You can call someone, you can text someone, and if they're not replying or they're not, you know, it could be something as coming over for a cup of tea, going for a walk in the park, anything. But it's don't give up trying to help them. You might not get a reply 3 times in a row, but just don't give up, because, you know, you'll break through eventually.
No, thank you. And I think I actually, you know, again, speaking personally, your comment about the silence is a really good one, because I always want to try and fix things and I hear myself filling that void. So I think that's a really important message to take away. So Josh, if you don't mind if I just stay with you for a second. So obviously we've, you know, been talking about the experience for your family and for you, but you also talk quite a lot about your experience as a student whilst living with depression. There's been a lot of, you know, really upsetting cases reported in the media over the last few years about this. You know, what would you suggest to universities? What could they be doing to help support student mental health better? Thanks, Josh.
There's not one thing. Unfortunately, there's a opt-in charter which didn't exist when I was there. So you can be at your last final day of school, you can be 1 day away from 18, and if you miss a single lesson or piece of homework, you know, they might call your parents about it. The second you turn 18, the day 1 of Freshers Week, and legally, and I understand why, there is no contact. So their child could miss 4 months of university. And there's been cases, unfortunately, where the first time the parents have been aware anything is wrong is when they receive the worst phone call that their child is no longer alive. And that's starting to change, but you have to opt in for that. And I think spreading that knowledge of, and there's sort of a lot of key signs that we're not looking out for, and we sort of need to. One of them is mail in a pigeonhole. If that's building up over weeks and months, that's clearly something's wrong. But I think it also has to come from a student, not to put the pressure on fellow students, but have to look out for each other slightly more. And it can be something as if someone's drinking 7 days a week, that's probably a sign. If they're refusing to engage socially or with university. But I know there used to be a warden scheme at Bristol University where it was almost like a mini headmaster in each hall, and that's all been scrapped, which is just a massive step backwards, because at least it was someone keeping an eye. There are live-in master students who were slightly older, slightly wiser perhaps, looking out for others. But then when you actually speak to them, they had an afternoon's worth of training, and supposed to be looking after 200 students, and it's all very well saying you can knock on my door and have a cup of tea to those, but I think more proactive approach, maybe knock on everyone's door once a week and just have a 2-minute chat with everyone. But unfortunately, there's no one fix. The counselling at Bristol University has, you can wait months, and then when you get there, it's almost like, are you going to actively end your life today? No. Okay, brilliant. Next. And it's if you've been waiting months for that appointment, it can be massively damaging to sort of just be in this conveyor belt without actually receiving help. I think but ultimately, I think just kindness. Everyone needs to listen to each other slightly more and be slightly kinder is the only long-term fix, unfortunately.
No, I mean, it's not unfortunate. If everyone could take away your words and be a little bit kinder, I think, to everyone else and maybe to themselves too, then that would be an amazing thing. But, luckily, we have a lot of people, a lot of our members work in mental health, if not necessarily actually in a mental health setting, but in a GP practice or in the community, who will be watching this talk later. So thank you so much for sharing your advice. And, I believe in a ripple effect. It is going to all have a difference in the future. So, Mandy, I promise I didn't post this question, which I've now made it sound like absolutely I did, but I didn't. So I'm going to go to you. And someone said, can you give any advice to us mums, although I'm sure it goes for dads too, who have a strong desire or need to fix things for our children? I know it's a bit of a tough one, but thanks, Mandy.
Thank you, Vicky. I think that was certainly my default, as I mentioned earlier. And it's really tough because, when he was 3 and he fell over and banged his leg, I could give him a bag of Monster Munch, and a wipe with the magic sponge, and everything was great. If only it was that easy. And actually, I think part of my fix-it recovery, if you like, is learning that I can't fix this thing for him. It has to come from Josh, obviously supported by us, but it has to come from him. The temptation is still strong. I can't tell you. I've looked at Josh on the screen today and thought, gosh, he looks a bit pale. Should I get him some Lemsip? Is he okay? Is he warm enough? What does he need? He's 25. And I think it's always going to be there. But actually, I realise that also for his resilience and for him to understand how to look after himself best, he needs to figure it out without me, like a sweeper in curling, going ahead on the path and making everything smooth. It's been the toughest thing for me to learn. I'm really bad at it. I'm probably the worst person to give advice on that aspect. But also one thing I will say is the fact that all you parents, guardians, carers, people who are looking after people with depression or mental health issues, the fact that you are already aware, the fact that you are already concerned, asking the right questions, interested enough to find a resource that might help you, you are decades ahead of where I was. I was completely blinkered. I thought, yeah, he'll be fine. It'll all be fine. It'll all be fine. Just keep painting on a happy face, smiling a lot. And actually that did him and his illness and everyone else who has that illness a great disservice. So when mums, in fact, I did a talk last night and one mum said to me, I am so desperately worried. I talk to my son all the time. And I said, look, let me stop you right there. Your son's 15 and you're talking to him about this. You are already preventing most likely what happened to us when Josh was 20, because you're having that conversation when he's 15. It was really heartening, and she I could see it struck a chord with her, and it's absolutely true. The fact that you're already aware of how to handle that, or even that, the fixing it might be a sensitive thing or something you need to avoid. You're already streets ahead of where I was, definitely. But you know what? It ain't easy. I think particularly being a mother, a carer, or loving someone who suffers in this way, you're members of this really rubbish club. It's a rubbish club to belong to, but there are many, many members. And I think just understanding that there is support there, that people know what it's like. And even people now, we get messages daily of saying, I've read your book, or I saw you did this talk, or whatever, and I don't feel so alone. It's like, brilliant. Because they may sleep a little bit better that night, and I would have given anything for that. at our worst times. So yeah, you're not alone. We are not alone, and that's really important.
Thank you. And I think that sort of picks up on, we've got so many questions. So anyone who is listening in, if we can't get through them all, I do apologise. I'm trying to pick a good selection though. But this one sort of builds a little bit on what you've just been saying, your feelings of isolation as a parent and not knowing what you were doing. So I asked Josh earlier about, you know, how can we best support children or loved ones who are struggling with this? But how about you, Mandy? Who was supporting you when you were dealing with this? Were you able to reach out to other parents, professionals, or did it feel like you were on your own a lot of the time?
Thank you for that question. I did feel like I was on my own a lot of the time because I felt I wasn't the one who was ill, and therefore I couldn't legitimise my own feelings of struggle and worry, because there was a much, you know, it's almost like there's a major fire in the kitchen and someone's left a candle on, and I'm the candle and it's burning and burning, but actually there's a big fire in the kitchen, we need to deal with that. And it felt very much like that. In fact, for all members of the family, including Josh's brother, who's fabulous. He's just a really lovely bloke. He's great. I'm so proud of both of them. But he sort of got relegated. We all did, in the face of what was happening with Josh, because it was firefighting, and that was where all the attention and resource was needed. I was exhausted. I'm still quite exhausted for years, because I felt all my energy was going into it and I wasn't being replenished, because it is relentless. As you know, it wasn't as though I could package away his depression for 5 hours and have a nap. It was relentless and it was exhausting. I did reach out in the end because I thought, you know what, I need to talk to someone. I spoke to my GP, which wasn't great. I spoke to friends. I spoke to a couple of my nursing friends who said, you know what, you need to look after you too, because if it's a deck of cards, if you go down, the whole house collapses. And it was, yeah, she's right. I can't always be the strong one. I certainly took it out on my husband. We were pulled brittle like toffee, because we took out all our frustration on each other, as you do often when a crisis comes into your house. That's what happens. But of course, that was just all added pressure that none of us could deal with. And it was very important we kept on the same page, and the same page as Josh, to make sure that we were all handling it right. But it was tough. It is tough. Talking definitely helped me. Online support I found fantastic. There's a lot of really great charity work out there, whether it's Mind, Calm, the Samaritans, smaller charities too. There's some fantastic resource that's free and available. But of course, like anything, most of these things are underfunded and in such huge demand, it can feel like a bum fight to get what you need, which is so, it's like every area at the moment. There's so much need and so little time, effort and money, because there has to be, because everyone is pulled thin like that brittle toffee I was talking about. It's a huge problem, but every little bit does make a difference. That sounds like Tesco, doesn't it? Every little bit makes a difference, but it does. Every little helps. Thank you.
No, I think that's really helpful, and it actually again segues very nicely into the next question that I've got. Again, it's one really for both of you to answer. Sorry, Will, doing AV. So Michelle has said, as you are presenting to the Royal College of Nursing, and she wants to know, did you have any positive experience from nurses? And I'm just going to interject here. This is what I love. I'm not a nurse, but I'm a librarian, and this is what I admire so much about the nurses, healthcare support workers, all the nursing profession I work with. Was there anything we could do better? So they always want to be improving the care that they give to patients and their families. So I don't know, Josh, would you like to go first? Thank you.
Personal interaction with nurses was when I cut my wrist open, and they were wonderful. To be honest, it was Southmead Hospital in Bristol is absolutely incredible. Everyone there did an amazing job, above and beyond, and I couldn't ask for any better care than I received there. Unfortunately, I can't say the same about wider healthcare providers, GPs especially. I think it is luck. It's pure luck who you see, how busy they are. I also saw a psychiatrist in Bristol who was great and listened, and I really felt like I understood him, and I felt like I was being listened to. So overall, I think in the healthcare community, there is a long way to go. However, the nurses, all the nurses I dealt with were wonderful. I wouldn't ask for anything to change in that department.
I suppose from my perspective, yes, I have had quite a lot of contact with the nursing community, and my experience has always been wonderful. You are my heroes. I mean, from giving birth to having cancer to watching my son struggle with his mental health, you are my heroes, and I just wish I had a magic wand to give you the funding, the voice, the time, and the facilities you need to do the job that you want to do in the way that you want to do it. Is that prudent enough? I don't know. I'm trying not to be too controversial, but that's my strong belief. But I think you are absolutely incredible, and I think some of the most incredible advice I was given from nurses was look after yourself. Just look after yourself, and just that feeling that nothing I was going to say was going to be, unheard before or outrageous. All my concerns were legitimate. All my worries were legitimate, and just someone listening to me in a non-judgmental way and offering me support that made me feel that my concerns were valid and I wasn't a hysterical mother or an overreactive, or, it was like, no, you should definitely have called us and this is exactly the right thing to do. And it was like, oh, okay, and you take it from here, but it was a really nice, comforting experience. Again, I've had nothing but wonderful, glorious experiences. We're extremely lucky to have our local hospital, Southmead Hospital in Bristol, and it's just, we are extremely lucky.
Well, that's wonderful to hear. Like I said, again, I'm not a nurse, but a librarian, and I'm always filled, I'm so inspired by the nurses, the student nurses, the healthcare support workers that come into the library who are constantly, always thinking about other people. And I do like that takeaway, though, about looking after yourself too if you're trying to provide care for other people, which I think is so important for our nurses out there. And again, that's one of the reasons we're so grateful to the Reading Agency and to both of you, because this is an opportunity, even though it's a very, moving, quite harrowing conversation that we're touching on, it's also about taking time to read, to do something for yourself. So again, I can't stress enough, if people would like copies of the book, please get in touch and we'll send them out to you. We've got 5 minutes left, so what I'd like to do is just tell you a couple of the comments that we've had in the conversation, which are amazing. So someone has said that they listened to the audiobook version and that both hearing your accounts in your own voices was incredibly powerful, and that all parents should read this book. And this is so true. Depression can strike anyone at any age. Lots of people just saying, thank you so much. Your relationship seems so amazing. Please, maybe I won't ask you both to delve down into that any further. Again, I know my son would be mortified if I asked him on camera to discuss our relationship, but we're so grateful. So I guess just to wrap up something on a little lighter note, Josh, are you going to write some more books without wanting to put pressure on you? Has this given you a taste for the whole writing life experience, which I understand is incredibly difficult? I could barely write a paper at university, so I have full respect for the authors out there.
Definitely, I would like to write more in the future. I don't know what that's going to look like right now, whether it's fiction, non-fiction, but we'll see. Definitely something soon, yeah. And if I may, I'd just like to take this opportunity to say to everyone suffering out there, just a small piece of advice, if that's okay. Just hold on in there. Every single second you don't want to be on this planet and you are is an achievement. Take things hour by hour, minute by minute in a crisis if you need to. Things can and usually do get better. So you've just got to hold on, and it can be the hardest thing in the world, but take things day by day and eventually you will get better. There's no quick and easy fix. It's like when you become depressed, it's a slow and subtle process. The colours sort of drain out the world and you just feel less and less of yourself, but it comes back, unfortunately, just as slowly as you come depressed, but you do come out the other side of it. So just please hold on in there and don't do, it's a very permanent thing for a quick fix. So please don't do that. Thank you.
No, thank you so much, Josh. And Mandy, I think we're both tearing up a bit now. What are you working on at the moment? So what writing projects have you got underway?
I'm working on not crying right now on video.
I completely understand that, yes.
And I am wearing mascara. I've just finished my memoir, which comes out in September, which is all about my journey, but it's actually my story from growing up in a house without any books, what it's like being someone who's, never had any self-esteem, any confidence, feeling very much less than, with a head full of ideas but no idea of how to get out the blocks. How I published my first book at 44, and I think I've just sold 17 million novels in 22 countries in 10 years. And if I can do it, anyone can do it. So it's about doing something for you. It's never too late. My life story, that's out in September. It's called Women Like Us.
Well, thank you so much, both of you. It's been inspiring listening to you in every way. I am so grateful to you for giving your time, and not just your time, but for sharing these experiences with us. And I know that everyone who's both on the call today, and there are going to be many people watching this event afterwards, thank you, from everyone here in Royal College of Nursing in Wales, and personally from myself, it's been amazing. So thank you, Mandy. Thank you, Josh. Thank you, The Boy Between, and we hope to read more by both of you in the future. Thanks everyone for listening, and that's a wrap up for today's Journal Club. Hope to see you all again soon. Bye for now.